Hi everyone, this is Kara from the Center Township Branch Library, and tonight for adult storytelling, I'm going to be telling a Scottish tale of the Stolen Bairn and the She. The word bairn means child, and she is spelled S-I-D-H, so if you see it written out somewhere, you might not think it is pronounced she, but that's the way it's pronounced. This story comes from a collection of folk tales that I have here on my Kindle. It is Fearless Girls, Wise Women, and Beloved Sisters. So let's begin. There was a path that ran along a cliff above the sea, and along that path, in the gloaming of a misty day, came two fairy women of the She. They stopped suddenly in the middle of the road, seeing a bundle there. It was small and moved, making a soft mewling sound. They leaned over and lifted the flaps, then stepped back in surprise. "'Tis a bairn," said one. "'Tis a mortal bairn," said the other. They looked all around them, but there was not a soul in sight. The path in front of them and behind them was completely empty, and beside them there was the cliff, and beyond that the sea. "What no one comes to be claiming is our own," said the first fairy. The second fairy wrapped the bundle under her shawl, and off they went, disappearing into the forest as soon as they had come. Down on the shore there were two fishermen rowing along. One of them pointed up the cliff and gave a shout, for he'd seen something fall there. They rowed the boat over the rocks and waves, then climbed up the cliff to find a young lass lying on the rock shelf. They loaded her into their boat and took her home for the women to nurse and tend. She didn't seem much harmed, except that she was dazed and daft. After 2 days she regained her wits and woke up suddenly. "Where's my bairn?" she cried. "Quick, fetch my bairn to me." The women stepped back in alarm, for they surely had no bairn to give her. Then an old wise woman approached. "Call upon your Creator for strength. There was no bairn with you upon that cliff. Happen he fell from your arms into the sea." "No," cried the woman. "He was not with me on the cliff. I left him safely in the middle of the road in a bundle, while I went to look for some water for him to drink." So the men were sent to look for the bairn upon the cliff, but they did not find him. Then they went from house to house, asking each family if they had found a bairn and taken him home, but no one had, and they had to come back and tell the lass that they had found nothing. She bided her time with them, but once she regained her strength, she set off. The fisher folk were sad to see her go, for they had long given up the bairn for dead, and they'd learned to love her well. "I'll come back and bide with you once I've gotten my bairn back to me," she promised, and then off she went. She went from croft to croft, village to village, but no one had seen or even heard of such a bairn. At last she came to a camp of gypsies. "Have you seen my bairn?" she asked, so pitifully that they took pity on her. They gave her food to eat out of her pot and washed her feet and took her to their old grandmother. "Come and bide with me a while," said the old grandmother. So they sat hand in hand, side by side, as the sun sank through the sky. When at last it was dark, the old grandmother slipped her hand from the lass's, threw some herbs on her pot, and made a fire. The flames leapt, and the smoke circled above her head, and she stopped to listen. "Give up your search, poor lass," she said, "for your child has been stolen by the She. They've taken him into the sheen, and what goes in there seldom comes out again." The lass had heard of the She, and she knew that they were the most powerful of all fairies. "Can't you give me some spell to use against them?" she asked. The old grandmother shook her head. "My wisdom is as old as man, but the wisdom of the She is as old as time. There is no spell that I could give you to use against them. Still, there may be a way. The time is coming for the She to meet in the sheen. They are gathering there to choose a new ruler to rule for the next 100 years. If you can get into the sheen, you may be able to buy your bairn out of it." "But how am I to buy my bairn? I am a poor lass. What can I offer the she? And how could I get into the sheen?" "I do not know the answer for the first," said the old grandmother, "but as for the second, you may be able to buy your way into the sheen as well. The fairies, for all their wisdom, have no skill to make anything of value. Anything of value they must beg or steal. If you can find something that has no like in all the world, you may buy your way in and your bairn out." Then she laid her hand on the lass and put a spell on her to keep her from harm, and left. The lass sat there, her mind whirling, for she did not know what she could offer the she. But then she began to think of the old stories, of the white cloak of Necton and the golden harp of Rad. She went down to the shore, over the rocks, and collected the lost feathers from ducks that had fallen there. She wove them together into a cloak so soft and white it was as if she had pulled a cloud from the sky. Then she cut off her golden hair. Setting half of it aside, she used the other half to weave it into the cloak. Then she set the cloak under a bit of gorse and went back down to the shore. It was there that she found the old bones of animals that had washed up. They were bleached by the sun and smoothed by the tides, so she collected them and bent them and bound them into a frame for her harp. Then she took the rest of her golden hair and strung it around the harp so tightly that they became strings. When she plucked them, it made music so sweet that the birds stood still in the sky to listen. And she set off for the sheen. The lass walked by high roads and by roads until she came to the place of the sheen, and she hid behind a thicket. The sheen came in droves. They looked much like any other person, except they were very tall. They had long, pointed ears and slanted brows. The lass waited and watched while they all went into the sheen. Then at last, as she hoped, there came a straggler coming late. She stepped out from behind the thicket and made the cloak long so that it would catch the fairy's eye. "Who are you?" said the fairy angrily. "What has a human to do at the gathering of the she?" Then she saw the cloak. "Tell me what you want for the cloak, human. I must have it." "It is not for sale for gold nor money," said the lass, "but it has its price." "Tell me what it is," said the fairy. "I will do anything." "Take me into the sheen," said the lass. "I will take you," said the fairy. "Give the cloak over." But she knew that the fairies were a cunning folk, and they will cheat you wherever they can. So she said, "Take me into the sheen first, then you may have the cloak." So the fairy grabbed her by the hand and pulled her into the sheen. Once they were in, the lass gave up the cloak. The rest of the she, seeing a human amongst them, rushed forward to push her out, but she stepped quickly behind the fairy with the cloak. Once they all saw the white cloak, all they could do was stare at it and touch it, and they forgot she was there. She went past them to stand before the throne where the new king sat, and she boldly held up her harp. "What is that?" said the king. "'Tis a harp," said the lass. "I have many a harp," said the king, disinterested, "but none such as this." She plucked the strings, and it made such sweet and longing music that all the fairies stopped looking at the cloak and turned their eyes to the harp. "Give it to me," said the king. "I must have it." "Nay," said the lass, "'tis mine. I bound it with my own hands and strung the strings with my own hair. I'll not be parting with it easily." So the king had his servants bring out piles of gold and laid them at the lass's feet. "Tell me, will you take this prize for your harp? It is a prize worthy of any royalty." "No," said the lass. "What I want is my bairn, which your women stole from me along the black cliff." The king sat back. This was a price he did not want to pay. He had a mind to keep the bairn amongst them. So he sent for his servants to bring out more jewels, and he piled them on top of the gold. The pile rose to the woman's waist. "This is a prize fit for a king," he said. But the woman only stared at him and said, "Give me my bairn." When he realized that she would not be moved, he reluctantly sent for his servants to bring out the bairn. The bairn held out his arms as soon as he saw his mother, recognizing her. But the king held him up, away from the lass, and he said, "The harp first." She said, "The bairn first." And she would not give up the harp until she had the bairn in her arms, so the king had to give in. Once he had the harp, he plucked at the golden strings, and all the fairies stood in rapture. They were so enthralled that they did not notice the lass leaving with her bairn in her arms. And she left them there, listening to the music, perhaps for the next 100 years, as far as anyone knows. And she went back to the fisherfolk who'd been so kind to her, as she promised to do, and she and her bairn dwelt there happily for the rest of their days.